Good morning. Thank you very much, Suzuki-sensei, dear Eva. It's a real pleasure to join all of you and Kono-san, of course, particularly at this morning's seminar and to share with you a few considerations on how the digital partnership can be a vehicle for bringing the strategic relationship between Japan and the European Union to the next level. We had yesterday in the European Union delegation a seminar with Federica Mogherini, who was the European Minister of Foreign Affairs, the High Representative not long ago, and she engaged into a particularly productive conversation with key think tankers and academics here in Japan on how this relationship of like-minded champions of the rules-based international order can flourish and be best deployed to mitigate the impacts of the very volatile environment which Eva so well described a moment ago. And Kono-san, you also referred to the uncertainties of developments, in particular around the new US administration. And I think the digital partnership, together with, of course, a number of other pieces of our institutional relationship, I think, can be critical in allowing that strategic partnership to be deployed adequately. It's, of course, part of a broader setup. We have the Economic Partnership Agreement, which is particularly relevant also for your own thinking. It's under the Economic Partnership Agreement that we have very intense regulatory cooperation, highly relevant for digital legislation in Japan and in the European Union. It's under the Economic Partnership Agreement that we have now recently added data provisions, allowing effective free flow of data across our joined-up economic space. So you don't have to establish servers in the EU. You can deliver services out of Japan under these provisions. We, of course, also have the adequacy decision, which allows also private data to be flowing across our two societies. We also have the Strategic Partnership Agreement, which covers, nearly 40 policy areas, which are all obviously affected and enhanced by the deployment of digital instruments and technologies. And Japan and the European Union have a number of more specific partnerships. The digital partnership is the most active one, frankly, under the leadership of Kono-san as digital minister. It met twice in 23 and 24 and co-chaired by Kono-san and Thierry Breton, produced particularly meaningful results I will briefly come back to in a moment. We also have a Green Alliance, again much affected by digital instruments. We have a connectivity partnership to also reach out to the world jointly, and very relevant for the work today, Japan and the European Union launched on the 1st of November. This was one of the last acts of Josep Borrell, the previous High Representative. He launched with Iwaya-san a security and defense partnership, which is going to prove to be, I think, particularly meaningful in the overall environment of today, and where many areas of work under the digital partnership are also referred to. For example, work on cybersecurity, work on foreign interferences and manipulation of information, but also more strategically a potential for work on defense industries. I'll come back to that. Now, the digital partnership, as said, is really particularly spectacular, frankly, in terms of outcomes, and I'm much looking forward to the discussions of today's seminar to feed into it. It's, of course, a partnership between two administrations, but it's a partnership between also industries and key actors of these ecosystems. And we are increasingly, as we deploy the digital partnership, also benefiting from very structured engagement with many of you today and beyond to ensure that we get a real sense of the needs of industries across the economic space of Europe and Japan, and of course also of societies. I'm just going to give you a few examples of the good work done, and there are too many of those, so I will have to be very telegraphic before I then come to 3 or 4 questions I would like to put to you for today's work. I mean, firstly, I think semiconductors is one of the most spectacular parts of the joint work, which is ongoing. Under the partnership, we have an MOU to monitor security and supply chains. I think this is particularly important in a very complex supply chain environment. Very productive discussions are going on a regular basis, in particular with METI. We have research cooperation as well. But I think most spectacular, even if it is not completely under the partnership per se, is the work Europe and Japan do together on the next generation of chips, so less than 2 nanometers. The spectacular effort of Japan to be really not just catching up, but leading in that very specific field of technology. And the work between Europe and Japan, or the support of Europe to Lapidus in Hokkaido, I think is particularly important to be underlined here, where I often say that without Europe, Lapidus is not going to happen. And I'm saying this, of course, in a slightly pointed manner, but frankly, without IMEC in particular, I think this technological leap, which will, of course, benefit massively also the work of IMEC and the Europeans, but without IMEC, this cannot happen, and obviously without the machines provided by ASML, neither. So yes, Lapidus is a Japanese effort, very much also with a US partner, obviously. But I think the two critical components are also European. And that, I think, provides a particularly strong basis for also future cooperation in the area of next generation chips and in these very complex supply chains. That was not very telegraphic. I admit I was a bit long, but let me now move to a more telegraphic style on quantum technology, joint research. You know that quantum science is led largely by European scientists. Quantum industry is not yet, admittedly, but science certainly, and there's really great research ongoing with outstanding science here in Japan as well. The same goes for beyond 5G, where we have been cooperating for more than 15 years, which of course is an important standard-setting dimension. Artificial intelligence, Constance, you covered it already extremely well. So just to say that indeed there will be a safety research agreement with the AI Safety Institute and the equivalent on the European Union side. And I think this is particularly important because we are all looking at AI under the angle of major investments in the US and of course these breakthroughs recently in China. But I think it's also important to underline that AI research is really now at the forefront of the priorities, both in Japan and in Europe. And if you look just at the computing capacity, which we have, Europe and Japan, respectively, and I think also the untapped data lakes across many sectors, I think there's little doubt to be had that there is massive potential there, obviously with then the challenge to translate these research outcomes into industry and into society. Cybersecurity, particularly productive area of work under the partnership. I'm sure there will also be discussions today. This is much connected to the security and defense partnership now also. But I think here work we are doing together, work which is also done by Japan with Europe and the US in this case to train practitioners across ASEAN are particularly meaningful outcomes. I covered data already. And Kuno-san, you refer to data free flow with trust, which we are promoting together. And then maybe also the work on digital platform competition. Yes, now under pressure. There is no doubt that Europe is going to be under pressure, is already under pressure. Some work is happening in Washington in terms of looking at the regulatory setup, the sovereign regulatory setup in Europe. And it's indeed a clear scenario that legislation, which is so important for our societies and where there is a very strong degree of convergence in terms of thinking between Europe and Japan, will also now be put under pressure by discussions with the United States in the tariff discussion, but also well beyond. So that is an important part of our regulatory cooperation. And last, infrastructure and the submarine cables, which are progressing, not, I hope, a bit more than at Arctic pace, but it's of course a very challenging exercise. There are a number of project promoters which are much involved and committed and investing into it, possibly a little bit more on the European side, in Finland, in Sweden, with support from European Union institutions and also financial support, but also with good interlocutors in Japan. I think the case for that additional connection in terms of security, in terms of latency, is, I think, very strong. Obviously, laying cables in the Arctic environment is a major challenge in itself. But the resilience which would be provided by such infrastructure, and also the capacity which would be provided in terms of connecting our supercomputing capacity, I think makes it a particularly exciting, and I'm sure over time, a very successful part of the digital partnership. Now, I'm nearly at the end of the allocated time, so let me now put a couple of questions to you in how you can feed into the work of the digital partnership. The ministers will meet again, by the way, shortly on the 12th of May will be the next meeting of the Ministerial Council under the partnership, with Executive Vice President Virkkunen traveling to Tokyo on that occasion, meeting with ministers of Digital Agency, MIC, and METI. And I think we need to continue to help develop the partnership against the broader environment which I developed or noted in my introduction. I think one area is emerging technologies and security cooperation. I think you are certainly aware of the massive efforts which Europe is putting into its autonomous defense capacity. The plan is 800 billion euros, of which 150 billion at EU level with new loans, the rest being facilitated under EU fiscal rules, with key priorities already identified in terms of capabilities, and a massive effort to really look at joint procurement, also ensuring that there is more cohesiveness in terms of military capacity between European member state armies. This is going to be a major development in the next months and years in Europe. It's not going to be easy, so you will hear a lot about how complex this is to bring about. But I think there is little doubt to be had that this is happening. And we very much also hope that our like-minded partners can be connected to that effort. And the European Commission, in its defense white paper a few days ago, part of that package, noted that it would recommend joint procurement with like-minded partners, those which have a security and defense partnership. Therefore, very much Japan as well. Dual-use technologies is a complex subject. It used to be for me particularly complex and nearly taboo as Vice Minister for Research before I came here as ambassador. And indeed, we need to ensure that we can distinguish civil applications from military application, but we all know, and you particularly, that the dual-use dimension of research and innovation is going to become more and more pervasive and relevant, and therefore your thinking in that would be highly relevant as well. A second example is, I think, the work to be done on coordination, and here particularly on economic security and supply chains. So I mentioned Rapidus already in terms of its development here in Japan, with the pilot production, imminent, and then full-scale industrial production. I think we will in Europe eventually also be able to invest in these cutting-edge technologies, but we are not yet ready, and we are not at the stage where Japan now is. So I think there is certainly a lot of potential for industries to be really working very closely together, and for Rapidus to benefit from a European market, and for Rapidus to be, on the other hand, also a key component of Europe's future-oriented supply chain in that area. So there's really here a lot of potential for industries to hash out, but I think the digital partnership is also a place where that can be discussed and can be supported. And then the last question is one which I already noted, which is the issue of regulatory frameworks and global governance. On AI, the Hiroshima process is, of course, particularly important. The regulatory discussions between Europe and Japan are very, very fruitful. But again, I already mentioned it, they are going to be under pressure from discussions with our US partner. And I think it is therefore also particularly important that Europe on the one hand, Japan on the other hand, but I think jointly as well, we try to define what are the key components on which we should not compromise, because this is also what our societies expect and require from policy making and regulatory frameworks. So thinking on your side on that would certainly also be very valuable. So thank you very much again, and I've been slightly too long, but I hope relevant for your work. And again, thank you very much for inviting me to speak along, Kono-san. It was a pleasure, and have a good session today. Thank you.
何を目的として、経済安全保障策を作っていくのかということが今のトランプ政権から全く見えてきませんので、中国と東南アジアの関係っていうのがそちらにもリンクしてきた非常に複雑な構造になっていると思います。